Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're cutting through the noise to look at a really foundational piece of the Web3 economy, Avalanche, or AVX. If you dig into the material, the core promise is pretty clear. Avalanche positions itself as this ultra-fast, low-latency platform, and it's built for scale. They aren't just trying to host a few apps. Their mission, and they state this pretty explicitly, is to help digitize and tokenize, well, all the world's assets.
Yeah, they're really aiming to be the network for interoperable finance. It's a huge goal.
And when we say performance, we should probably put some numbers on that. The claims are north of 4,500 transactions per second.
And maybe more importantly, near instant transaction finality.
Right, often under a second. So our mission for this deep dive is to pull apart the engineering that makes that possible. We're going to look at the consensus, the unique multi-chain setup, and the real game changer here, the subnet.
Which is what's really pulling in these massive institutional and gaming projects.
Exactly. So let's unpack it. How does Avalanche actually deliver on this promise of speed and customizability?
Well, that combination is really the key. Speed, scale, and they do it while staying pretty decentralized. What's fascinating to me is that they support thousands of validators, but you don't need, some crazy expensive specialized hardware rig like some of the other chains.
Okay, so where do we start?
I think we need to look at three things that all lock together. First, their novel consensus. Second, the three-chain architecture. And then finally, how the subnets allow it to scale out horizontally.
All right, let's start with the engine room then, the consensus mechanism. When you hear sub-second immutable finality, the source calls it zero conf, that sounds like a major breakthrough. They call it the Avalanche Consensus Protocol.
It is a breakthrough.
Yeah.
And to really get why, you have to think about the two big families of consensus that came before.
Okay.
You've got classical consensus, right? Think fast Byzantine fault tolerance. It's incredibly quick, it's final, but it really doesn't scale well. You get past a few dozen participants and it just falls over.
And on the other side, you have Nakamoto consensus.
Yeah.
Like Bitcoin.
Exactly. Super decentralized, permissionless, but it's slow. And you only get probabilistic finality.
And Avalanche somehow found a way to bridge those two worlds, getting the speed of classical, but keeping the decentralization of Nakamoto.
That's the core idea. It uses this really clever mechanism of randomized subsampling and repeated voting.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that mean in practice?
It means instead of forcing every single node to agree with every other node, which would create a massive network bottleneck.
Right, quadratic messaging. It would just grind to a halt.
It would. So instead, a node just repeatedly pulls a small, random subset of other validators to build confidence in a transaction.
Like building a snowball.
That's the analogy they use, yeah. The algorithm is literally called snowball.
The source material gets really specific with the numbers here. Can you walk us through the math that builds that confidence?
I can. So when a node hears about a transaction, it asks a small random sample of validators. Let's call that sample K, which they set to 20.
Okay, so it just asks 20 of its peers.
Right. And if a supermajority, they call it alpha, set at 14 out of those 20, if they all agree, that preference gets a little stronger. The node does this again and again until it gets the same answer for 20 consecutive rounds. That's beta, the decision threshold.
And once it hits that threshold, the transaction is considered final.
Final and irreversible. And the beauty of it is, because a node only ever talks to 20 others at a time, the amount of communication stays constant. It doesn't matter if there are 100 validators on the network or 10,000.
Which is how it scales.
That's the key to its scalability.
The sources also talk a lot about this design choice of prioritizing safety over liveness. That sounds great, very secure, but what's the actual trade-off there for a user?
It's all about providing extremely high security assurance. Prioritizing safety means the network can tolerate a huge percentage of malicious nodes, maybe 60 to 80%, without ever risking the integrity of past transactions.
So no rollbacks, ever.
Exactly. The trade-off is in how it handles a major conflict.
Yeah.
If there's a set of conflicting transactions and the network just can't decide, maybe there's a huge attack or a network partition, Avalanche will simply halt progress on only those conflicting transactions.
So the rest of the network keeps moving.
The rest of the network is completely unaffected, still processing valid transactions. For the user, it just means their specific conflicting transaction might time out, but there's zero risk of a confirmed payment suddenly being reversed. It chooses security over being constantly on in a bad situation.
That makes a lot of sense, especially for financial applications where you need that ironclad guarantee.
Precisely.
Okay, so this is where the architecture gets more complex. Avalanche isn't one blockchain. It's a network of 3 specialized chains, the primary network. Why do that? Why not just one big chain for everything?
Specialization and optimization. If you try to run complex smart contracts and simple token transfers and validator staking all in one chain, you create bottlenecks. The whole system moves at the speed of its slowest task.
So they split the labor.
They did. You have the X chain, the P chain, and the C chain.
Let's take the X chain first. The source says it uses a DAG, a directed acyclic graph for assets. Why a DAG for that specific job?
A DAG is perfect for parallel processing. Simple token transfers don't always need to be in a strict single-file line like smart contract executions do. Using a DAG lets the network confirm a bunch of transfers in parallel, which really cranks up the throughput for assets.
And then you got the other 2, the P chain and C chain, which are linear.
Correct. The P chain, or platform chain, is the coordination layer. It handles all the staking, manages the validator set, and this is critical. It's where you go to create new custom blockchains, the subnets.
And finally, the C chain, the contract chain. This is the one most people probably interact with, right? The smart contract platform.
Yeah, and its killer feature is that it's fully compatible with the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM.
Which is table stakes for adoption these days.
Absolutely. It means developers can use all the tools they already know and love. Solidity, MetaMask, Hardhat. You can basically copy and paste a successful Ethereum app over to Avalanche. That's what really fueled its early DeFi growth.
Let's talk tokenomics here, specifically on the C chain. AVX is used for staking and fees, but the fee model is pretty unique.
It's a really crucial part of the design. Avalanche burns the entirety of its transaction fees.
The whole thing, 100%.
100%. Any base fee, any priority fee, a user pays to get their transaction through faster. It all gets burned.
So it's not like Ethereum where only the base fee is burned and the priority fee goes to the validator?
Nope. Here, the whole fee goes up in smoke. It creates this genuine, ongoing deflationary pressure on the AVX supply. The more people use the network, the more AVX is removed from circulation forever.
Which accrues value back to the token holders just through scarcity. That's a powerful incentive.
A very powerful long-term incentive, yeah. It's built right into the protocol.
Okay, let's pivot to what seems to be the main event right now. Subnets. How would you define a subnet for someone who gets L1s and L2s?
I'd say think of subnets as their own sovereign, isolated layer 1 blockchains that are just built using Avalanche's infrastructure.
So not a layer 2, which settles back to the main chain.
Exactly. They're more like custom-built L1s that inherit Avalanche's core security model because their validators still have to stake AVX on the primary network, but they have their own independent execution environment.
And this is where that horizontal scaling comes from. A new super popular game can launch its own subnet and its millions of transactions won't clog up the C chain for the DeFi user.
That's the key. The sources call it infinite scalability.
That's a bold claim. If you can launch infinite chains, how do you not run into, infinite state bloat? How do you keep it decentralized if the data just grows forever?
That's the right question. And the answer is that all the transaction data is also decentralized across the subnets. A validator on subnet A only has to care about the state of subnet A. They don't need to know or store anything about the 500 other subnets out there.
So the primary network is more of a root of trust.
A root of trust and a coordination layer, exactly. It manages the validators, but the actual execution and data storage happens on these independent threads.
And the customization on these subnets is what's really driving this institutional adoption. What can you actually customize?
Pretty much everything. You can set your own native gas token. It doesn't have to be AVX. You can create your own token economics. You can even choose your own virtual machine. You don't have to use the EVM.
And the big one for institutions.
The big one is compliance. You can create a permissioned subnet where every single validator has to pass a KYC AML check. Or you can require that all validators must be located in, say, Switzerland. That kind of granular control is something traditional finance absolutely needs.
Okay, let's connect that to what's been happening recently. The sources point to some big news in late 2025.
Yeah, some really significant moves.
Like the crypto finance integration. That's providing regulated banks and brokers in Europe with compliant access to AVX custody and trading. This isn't just a crypto company using it. This is traditional finance plug-in directly in.
And it completely validates that design focus on regulatory needs. Then you saw the digital liquidity gateway from FIS and Entain choosing Avalanche to connect community banks to institutional liquidity. They're using Avalanche as the rails to bridge old-school financial silos.
Let's get really specific with a real-world asset, or RWA example. The Eden RWA project, tokenizing luxury real estate. This seems to be the perfect use case for subnets.
It's a perfect example. So Eden is tokenizing ownership of luxury properties in the French Caribbean. They do this compliantly by using what's called a special purpose vehicle, an SPV. It's a legal entity that just holds the asset.
So the token you own represents a share of that legal company, not a direct deed to the house.
Exactly. And the subnet makes the whole thing work seamlessly. You get fractional ownership through standard ERC20 tokens. Rental income gets paid out automatically in stable coins like USDC through smart contracts. And because it's a dedicated subnet, they can build in all the specific governance and compliance rules they need right at the base layer.
We're even seeing it in places like entertainment, that real-time music royalty system. Paying artists in seconds instead of months that's a genuine disruption.
It really is. So what this all points to is that Avalanche is strategically moving beyond just being another Alt L1 for DeFi and gaming. With subnets, they're becoming more of an interoperability protocol, an L0, that lets enterprises build their own custom compliant chains.
Okay, so for the really curious listener, the person who wants to get their hands dirty and help secure this network, what's the barrier to entry to run a node and become a validator on the primary network?
The main barrier is financial. You need to stake a minimum of 2,000 AVX.
2,000 AVs. And what about the hardware? Can I just run this on my laptop?
Not if you want to be reliable, no. You really need dedicated hardware. The recommendation is at least 8 virtual CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, and really fast storage. A 1 terabyte SSD, preferably an NVMe drive, because the database is constantly being written too.
So you're looking at a dedicated machine or a cloud server, a VPS?
Yeah, which adds a subscription cost, 50 to 150 bucks a month, something in that range.
That's a serious commitment. Which brings up the risk. You mentioned there's no slashing on Avalanche. Why did they make that choice when other networks like Ethereum use slashing as a big stick to keep validators in line?
It was a deliberate choice to encourage more people to participate. By taking away that risk of, catastrophic capital loss from an accidental misconfiguration, they lower the barrier for good actors.
So how do they enforce good behavior?
Just through incentives. If your node is offline or non-responsive, you don't get any rewards. So there's still a very strong incentive to be online and secure, but you don't have this constant fear of losing your entire stake because your internet went out.
This has been an incredibly deep dive. We've covered the math behind the consensus, the 3-chain architecture, and how subnets are really shifting their focus toward institutional and regulated use cases.
I think the key takeaway is that Avalanche's design has always been about high assurance. The consensus mechanism prioritizes safety and finality, which is exactly what capital markets and RWA tokenization need to have confidence.
So given that deep focus on safety and the fact that institutional adoption requires absolute confidence and regulatory flexibility,
it poses a really interesting question for you to think about. Does this core design choice, favoring that robust security and immutability above all else, while enabling total customizability for regulation, does that make Avalanche uniquely positioned to become the foundational pillar for the future of decentralized traditional finance?
It seems like a lot of major financial players are starting to believe the answer is yes.